Hello, everyone. This is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Really appreciate you watching and your support. Today, I want to talk about Anthony Fauci. He's been in the public spotlight almost 3 years now. Prolific liar. On top of that, just wrong about so many different things on so many different levels. And also very active in suppressing any dissensions. I was involved in producing a documentary that dealt with the cost of the shutdown during COVID. I was involved in producing this film in 2020. It was completed. We started production in, I think, May, and it was completed before the end of the year in 2020. I'm very proud of the film. It's called Pros and Con Artists: The True Cost of COVID-19. It's published on the channel. Check it out. The intent was that it was not a political, and I don't think it is. We interviewed people from all walks of life. But in the course of doing the film, researching, there was not agreement on the shutdown measures. And the mainstream media has presented this as there was widespread consensus, and that is absolutely not true. World-renowned epidemiologists and public health experts were cautioning against this, and one of the reasons is because they did not know what the infection mortality rate was. Well, this is Anthony Fauci, March 11th, 2020, explaining what in no uncertain terms.
Probably for the practical understanding of the American people, the seasonal flu that we deal with every year has a mortality of 0.1%. The stated mortality overall of this, when you look at all the data, including China, is about 3%. It first started off as 2 and now 3. I think if you count all the cases of minimally symptomatic or asymptomatic infection, that probably brings the mortality rate down to somewhere around 1%.
What the infection mortality rate was, that it was 10 times higher than the flu. Then days or weeks later, a very short time, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who is a dissenting voice, he was on Twitter, I think, in 2021, and he was censored. So this has happened quite frequently on all the social media platforms, but also the mainstream media did not interview dissenting voices. So if you only consumed the mainstream media, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, all that, you weren't going to hear Jay Bhattacharya, but this is him talking with Peter Robinson on, you can find this on YouTube, it's Uncommon Knowledge, interview with Jay Bhattacharya in early 2020.
What's Dr. Fauci up to when he says this is 10 times more lethal than the flu? He cannot know that. He should not be saying that. He cannot know, can he?
He doesn't know.
He doesn't know.
Yeah, and he can't know because nobody has done the serologic. Sorry to use technical, but like the serologic test means how many people in the population have antibodies to the virus. So that's what you need to know.
Okay.
So there's a reason Anthony Fauci was trying to suppress dissension, is that there's no widespread agreement about the effectiveness or necessity of these shutdowns. But you can't impose shutdowns if everybody doesn't agree to it. So he presents the face of science, and the mainstream media, of course, goes along with it. This is Jay Bhattacharya explaining better than I can why Anthony Fauci is trying to squash dissent.
We know that for a fact that Tony Fauci was cooperating with Mark Zuckerberg from emails from early in the pandemic. You asked me about what the motives were. I think the key motive is that if you're going to implement something as extensive, as damaging, as with such widespread impact as a lockdown, you have to have scientific consensus. You cannot, under any circumstances, implement something like this unless it's truly the case that 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 there is no contrary reasonable opinion about this within the scientific community. And I think Tony Fauci, in particular, wanted to create an illusion of that scientific consensus that did not exist. It didn't exist in March of 2020, and frankly, it never existed. As you can see, when we wrote the Great Barrington Declaration in October of 2020, just a few months later, so many scientists had signed on to it. Even if you say that there are many scientists on the other side, the point is that there was a debate going on inside the scientific community. And Tony Fauci and the federal government, the United States, could not abide by the existence of a debate, because they'd implemented an extraordinary policy that required absolute consensus.
Now, this interview with Dr. Bhattacharya, Stanford University, was done in shortly after it became known that Twitter was censoring him. And the interview took place on you can find this on YouTube. Unheard is the name of the channel. So he does this interview and he explains you can't possibly have this idea that must have social distancing, the shutdowns of businesses, vaccines are mandatory, the masks are absolutely necessary. You can't do all that if everybody doesn't go along with it. So that's what Jay Bhattacharya explains there. This is Anthony Fauci on CBS Face the Nation. If you watch this program, I don't know why you would do that. But softball questions from the interviewer, and Anthony Fauci is explaining why his dissenters are irrelevant, and they should be completely ignored because they don't represent science, and he does.
Science in general. So if they want to, I mean, anybody who's looking at this carefully realizes that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, there's a face, there's a voice you can recognize, you see him on television. So it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science.
That's a pretty smug interview. I mean, he's pretty smug. One of the things he says in this interview, he says, all I want to do is save lives. This is such a total nonsense. Nobody could believe this, because if you really were serious about that, you would interview with any channel you could get on. Instead, he loves celebrity being and going on the mainstream media, a friendly environment. But he's not done hardly any interviews with Fox News or Newsmax. He'd never show up on Newsmax or OAN or any other channel. But yet he'll do interviews with Australian television. So that's just it's a total lie. The thing about the infection mortality rate, I want to go back to that, is if it really were 10 times worse than the flu, as he says, you do the numbers, it comes out to be something like 2.5 million people on top of the 3 million people or so that die every year in the United States. If that were the case, why isn't he shouting that number from the rooftops? Look, I was right all along. Because he wasn't. And the interesting thing is this has happened many times in history. Remember the mad cow disease? There's Professor Neil Ferguson in the UK, and was very responsible for this fear over mad cow disease that came out to be it was nothing. So as far as a threat to human beings. Now along comes Anthony Fauci, March 2020, and the amount of fear that he's put into the population to this day is just astounding. And people make emotional decisions. They don't, we all do it. Not logical decisions, but emotional decisions. And you inject this amount of fear because people really believe that they're going to die. It's abominable, the fear that was injected in the population, because at the end of the day, the shutdowns made no impact whatsoever, or at least there's no proof that Fauci's presented. So the same with masks, the same with the vaccines. The idea that you're going to force small children to take a vaccine that is untested, and when their risk is so minuscule, sort of lottery type odds for a young child, especially under the age of 5, to die from COVID. This is a photo of Anthony Fauci, and this pose with your fingertips touching together. You don't see a lot of people doing this, but body language is not unimportant. It's not always accurate, but in Fauci's case, I've seen him make this pose many times, and it's a sign of confidence. I don't think he's confident in what he is, the substance of what he tells people. I think he's confident that he's protected. The mainstream media is protecting him. The powers to be in Washington are protecting him. And he's supremely confident in that protection. And I think that's what that pose symbolizes. Fauci complains that COVID policy was politicized. He was very instrumental in politicizing, because the effort to squash dissenting voices. It was always one side. He didn't present two sides. Didn't allow the other side to express their opinion. And there was another side. And we talk about the policies that Fauci espoused. There's no consideration back then, especially early 2020, of the damage that the shutdowns would do. I remember seeing an interview with Bill Gates on CNN. It was very difficult to get through, with Dr. Sanjay Gupta. I think it was a 2-hour interview. Really hard to get through. Not at one time during that interview did either of them discuss the effect, the negative effect that the shutdowns would have on not only people's daily lives, but also their health. So Anthony Fauci, I don't think much of him, but he is been in the spotlight for almost 3 years, and hopefully people are tired of him. I know I'm tired of him. But that's my episode today. I appreciate you watching. If you like the channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment. I really like to hear from you. Thank you again.